My name is Emily Carter, and this Thanksgiving was the first time I'd stepped foot back in my parents' house in 7 years. I thought I was ready. I thought distance had made me stronger, but nothing prepared me for what my mother said the moment I walked into that dining room. The house smelled the same: rosemary, baked turkey, and the faint scent of pine cleaner my mom used on everything. The same long oak table stood in the center, covered with dishes, candles, and plates already set for every member of the family. And yet, there was no seat with my name on it. Mom, Patricia Carter, stood at the far end of the table, stiff and tight-jawed, wearing her favorite auburn sweater. My dad sat silently at the head, flipping a football game on mute like he always did. My younger sister, Megan, smiled with that sugary sweetness she reserved for moments she knew would sting. I barely had time to set my coat on a chair before my mom said loudly, in front of our entire extended family, "You don't get to call this house your home anymore. You abandoned us." The room went still. Forks froze midair, a few cousins exchanged looks, and then, like someone snapped a wire, two relatives chuckled under their breath. Megan crossed her arms and added, almost proudly, "Yeah, maybe you should leave before dinner even starts." Their words hit harder than I expected. 7 years of silence between us, and this was the welcome I got? But I didn't let them see me flinch. I took a breath, kept my voice steady, and said, "I didn't abandon this family. This family abandoned me long before I left." And here, right in the middle of that moment, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family? Treated like you didn't belong? Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever felt this kind of betrayal. And if these stories help you feel less alone, hit subscribe. Your family here. I expected someone, anyone, to defend me, but Dad stared at the muted TV. An aunt avoided eye contact. Megan smirked like she'd already won. Mom pointed toward the hallway, her voice sharp as glass. "You don't get to call this house your home anymore. You abandoned us." The words bounced in my ears, loud and humiliating. I pushed my chair back slowly. The scrape echoed across the wooden floor, louder than their laughter, louder than their judgment. And then I walked out again. But this time, something in me had changed. This time, I wasn't leaving in shame. I was walking away with the truth. When I stepped off that porch and felt the cold Asheville air hit my face, it carried me back further than I expected. Back to the years when I tried so hard to earn a place in that house. People think distance begins the day you walk away, but for me, it started long before I ever packed a bag. Growing up, our home was always loud. Mom praised Megan's every breath, every test score, every cheerleading trophy, every compliment she got at church. She glowed when Megan walked into a room, like the world tilted in her direction. And I learned to shrink myself so I wouldn't take up space she never intended for me. I was the quiet kid who loved drawing house layouts on scrap paper, rearranging furniture in my room, staying up late to sketch design ideas I didn't know had names yet. I'd tape magazine clippings to my wall, color palettes, textures, lighting ideas. That was my version of magic. But to my mother, it was a distraction, a phase, something that didn't make sense because it didn't fit her version of a real career. "Art doesn't pay the bills, Emily," she'd say, whether I asked for her opinion or not. "Be more like your sister." Those 5 words shaped my childhood more than anything else. I remember being 14 when I built my first small model house out of cardboard and craft sticks. I spent weeks perfecting it. Tiny windows, a little staircase, even miniature frames on the walls. I brought it into the kitchen one Saturday morning, hoping she'd be proud. Instead, she barely looked up from the pancakes she was flipping. "That's cute," she said, "but it won't get you into college." I held on to her comment longer than I should have. Megan, on the other hand, was treated like a miracle child. Homecoming court, varsity cheer, college tours with Mom right by her side. When she mentioned becoming a nurse, Mom bought her scrubs to motivate her. When I mentioned interior design, Mom told me not to waste time. I tried to stay invisible in a house that only had room for one daughter. The moment that still stings the most, even now, happened my senior year in high school. I had spent months building my first real portfolio, drawings, color boards, photos of school projects. I kept it neatly organized in a blue binder, planning to present it to my art teacher for a scholarship recommendation. One afternoon, I came home and found the binder gone. Just gone. I tore through my room, then the living room, then the kitchen. When I finally found it, it was sitting on top of a trash bag near the back door, pages bent, corners smeared with something sticky like spilled soda. "Mom," I said, holding it up, trembling, "why is this in the trash?" She barely glanced at me while wiping counters. "Oh, that? I thought it was old homework. Don't leave junk lying around." Junk. She called my work, my dream, junk. I gathered the pages with shaking hands, trying not to cry as Megan walked by, rolling her eyes like my pain was inconvenient to her. Dad walked in a moment later, saw the mess, saw my face, and still said absolutely nothing. He grabbed a soda from the fridge and went to watch TV. That silence, it was louder than anything my mom ever shouted. From that day, I learned a rule that shaped everything that came after. If I wanted something, I'd have to build it alone. So I stopped asking for support. I stopped showing them anything I created. I kept my sketchbooks hidden under my mattress and stored digital files under password protection. I worked part-time at a hardware store to buy my first drafting tablet. Nobody asked what I spent my money on. Nobody cared. The distance grew year by year, not from rebellion, but from erosion. From tiny cuts that added up until I barely recognized the family I lived with. And the worst part? Some nights I still wished they'd notice me. Just once. Just long enough to say, "We're proud of you." But they never did. And so, little by little, I learned to stop expecting anything from them at all. By the time I left for college, the cracks between me and my family weren't cracks anymore. They were miles wide. But before I ever walked across that stage or packed my bags, the final years under that roof showed me who they truly were. After my portfolio ended up in the trash, something inside me shifted. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't cry where they could see. Instead, I quietly rebuilt the whole thing. Every sketch, every floor plan, every digital rendering. I worked late into the night while the rest of the house slept. I submitted it to a scholarship contest without telling anyone. 2 months later, I was called to the school office. "Emily, you won," my counselor said. "Full scholarship to the Art and Design program at UNC Charlotte." I swear I couldn't even speak. I stood there shaking, holding the certificate like it wasn't real. But the moment I walked into the house that evening and handed the envelope to my parents, everything changed. Mom frowned. "Charlotte? That's 3 hours away. Why would you go that far?" "Because it's my dream," I said, "and I earned it." She didn't congratulate me. She didn't hug me. She just crossed her arms and said, "We're not driving you. We're not paying for anything. If you want this life so badly, figure it out yourself." Dad stayed quiet again, and Megan laughed under her breath like leaving home was a joke only I didn't get. That was the moment anger started boiling in me. Not the explosive kind, but the slow burning kind that eats at your ribs. I spent the next few weeks preparing to leave on my own, working extra shifts, selling old clothes, packing only the essentials. Not once did anyone ask if I needed help. Then came the breaking point. 2 days before move-in day, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "You know," she said, slicing an apple like she was delivering casual advice, "family should come before selfish dreams." I stared at her, stunned. Selfish? It's a scholarship. I worked for it. "You're abandoning us, abandoning your sister," she insisted. "She needs you. What if something happens while you're off chasing whatever this is?" Anger flashed hot and bitter in my chest. "Megan doesn't need me," I said. "She has everything handed to her."
Mom slammed the knife onto the counter. "How dare you? Megan is the daughter who stayed, the one who cares about this family." She said it loudly, proudly, like she wanted the walls to absorb it. And that's when I realized she didn't just favor Megan, she resented me for not becoming her version of a perfect daughter. That night, Megan walked into my room uninvited, holding my acceptance letter. She waved it like it belonged to her. "You know Mom's right," she said. "Interior design? It's such a filler career." I snatched the letter from her. "Say whatever you want, Megan, but I'm going." She smirked. "Fine, but don't come running back when you fail." Fail. That was their favorite word for me. It fueled me through every late shift, every long night packing, every quiet moment when I questioned whether I was strong enough to walk away from a family that clearly didn't want me. But the worst moment came the night before I left. I walked into the living room where Mom and Dad were watching TV. "I'm heading out early tomorrow," I said. "I just wanted to say goodbye." Mom didn't respond. Dad gave me a tight nod without looking away from the screen. And Megan, she didn't even come out of her room. That was the first time I believed, really believed, that they'd already erased me. But I also realized something else. If I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life trying to earn love that was never meant for me. And that truth hurt more than any insult they'd ever thrown my way.
Leaving home wasn't the triumphant moment I had imagined. There was no music swelling in the background, no empowering goodbye scene. It was quiet, bleak, a dull ache sitting in the middle of my chest as I loaded 2 suitcases into the back of a used car I bought with every tip I'd saved. I remember standing at the edge of the driveway, staring at the house one last time. The porch light was still on, flickering gently against the wood panels. It should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like a door slamming shut behind me. One final reminder that I was walking away alone. The drive to Charlotte felt endless. 3 hours shouldn't feel like crossing continents, but that day, it did. With every mile, the silence inside the car grew heavier. When I finally reached campus, students were unloading furniture, hugging parents, taking first-day photos. Everywhere I turned, families were laughing, smiling, building memories. And I carried my own bags across the parking lot while my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. My dorm room was small, with beige walls and a single narrow bed. The mattress was stiff, and the overhead light buzzed in a way that made the whole place feel lonelier. I set my bags down and tried to breathe. This was supposed to be a new beginning, but it felt like I had arrived at the edge of the world with no safety net. The next months were hard, harder than anything I've ever lived through. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover what my scholarship didn't. Morning shifts at a cafe, evening hours restocking shelves at a home improvement store. Some nights I didn't even sleep, just pushed through exhaustion until my hands shook. I ate cheap ramen and leftover pastries the cafe let us take home. My clothes smelled like espresso and paint thinner, and every time I walked back to my dorm at 1 or 2 a.m., I'd watch groups of friends laughing together under streetlights. I wondered if I'd ever feel that kind of belonging. Every phone call home went straight to voicemail. Every text message I sent sat unread. Holidays passed with no invitation, no message, not even a "hope you're doing okay." On Thanksgiving break my first year, when the campus was empty and quiet, I sat alone in the dorm lounge eating a microwaved dinner. The loneliness wrapped around me so tightly, it felt like another layer of skin. I cried that night. Not because I was weak, but because it was the first time I accepted the truth. My family didn't miss me. They didn't even notice I was gone. There were days I doubted everything. My choices, my talent, my future. Days when exhaustion blurred my vision until I couldn't see the sketches in front of me.
Days when the weight of being unwanted felt too heavy to carry. One night, after a double shift, I collapsed onto my dorm floor and sobbed into my hands. The kind of sobs that shake your whole body, the kind that come from every year of being overlooked, dismissed, or belittled. If someone had knocked on my door then, I would have told them I didn't know how to keep going. But the thing about hitting bottom is sometimes that's where you discover the ground beneath your feet. Not strength, not resilience, just the smallest whisper inside you saying, keep going, just one more day. So, I did. One day, then another, then another. Not because I was brave, but because giving up wasn't an option anymore. Hope didn't return to my life with fanfare or fireworks. It showed up quietly, almost shyly, in the shape of a woman named Rebecca Collins. I met her during my sophomore year, in the design building's computer lab. I was hunched over a project, exhausted after an overnight shift. My eyes burned from staring at the screen too long, and my fingers were trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. I didn't even hear her walk up behind me. "You've got a good eye," she said. I jumped, thinking she was another student or maybe a professor I didn't know. But when I turned around, I saw a woman in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm, steady gaze you only find in people who have survived their own storms. She pointed at my screen, an office redesign I'd been working on for class. "This layout," she said, "feels like you actually listened to the space." No one had ever said something like that to me. Not with sincerity. Not with recognition. "Thank you," I whispered, trying not to sound as overwhelmed as I felt. We talked for a few minutes about materials, lighting, balance. I assumed she was a visiting instructor. It wasn't until the next week when my professor pulled me aside that I learned the truth. "That woman you spoke with, she's the owner of one of the best interior studios in Seattle," he said. "She asked about you." I must have looked stunned because he chuckled. "You made an impression. A big one." A week later, I got an email from her. She invited me to apply for an internship at her studio, Collins & Co. Interiors, in Seattle. Me, the girl who ate dinner alone in a college lounge. The girl whose family hadn't called in years. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I accepted the internship, packed my few belongings, bought a bus ticket I barely could afford, and moved across the country again to a place where I didn't know a soul. Seattle greeted me with rain, chilly air, and more gray skies than I'd ever seen. But when I walked into Rebecca's studio for the first time, everything felt warm, alive, full of potential. She introduced me to her team, showed me the projects they were working on, and gave me a desk with my own set of drafting tools. For the first time in my life, someone believed in me without conditions. "You're not here because of luck. You're here because you're good." Those words stayed with me. Little by little, my confidence returned. Not all at once, just piece by piece. I worked on residential remodels, small office redesigns, even helped draft layouts for boutique hotels. Rebecca pushed me, challenged me, trusted me with responsibilities I'd never dreamed of having. And she noticed everything. You're careful with details. You think before you draw. You design like someone who knows what it's like to rebuild from scratch. She didn't know my story then, but somehow she understood me anyway. Outside of work, life finally began to settle. I rented a tiny studio apartment with creaky floors and cracked windows, but it was mine. I made friends with baristas, students, creatives. I learned the bus routes. I learned to breathe again. Months turned into a year, and Rebecca eventually pulled me into her office. "I think you're ready." For what? I asked. To take the lead on your own project. My heart hammered. I felt 12 years old again, standing in a kitchen holding a ruined portfolio. Except this time, someone was putting the world in my hands instead of taking it away. The project was simple. Redesign a historic bed and breakfast on Bainbridge Island. But to me, it felt monumental. It felt like the beginning. And it was. The clients loved my work. Rebecca promoted me. Referrals doubled. My confidence grew. And eventually, with her blessing, I opened my own small studio, Carter & Co. A name I chose on purpose. A name that reminded me that families aren't only the ones you're born into, they're also the ones you build. My first few clients were modest, but word spread, projects increased, money stabilized, and slowly my life transformed into something I had once thought impossible. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. I didn't need my family's love to become someone worth loving. Hope, I learned, doesn't come from who hurt you. It comes from who sees you, exactly as you are, and still chooses to stand in your corner.
Success doesn't arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it shows up quietly, like a sunrise, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore once it's there. 3 years after I founded Carter & Co., everything changed. A boutique hotel chain in Oregon hired me to redesign all their lobbies. A magazine editor visited one of the finished spaces and loved it so much she wrote a feature titled "The Designer Who Brings Soul Back into Spaces." That article opened every door. By the next spring, a national design conference in Charlotte invited me as a keynote speaker. I stood backstage the morning of my talk, staring at the crowd of hundreds filling the auditorium: students, architects, design firms, investors. They weren't there for the version of me my family had dismissed. They were there for the version I fought to become. I was nervous, but the moment the lights dimmed and I walked onto the stage, everything sharpened. I spoke about rebuilding identity, using design to heal, and creating spaces that make people feel seen. When the audience stood and applauded, I felt something inside me settle, maybe for the first time. After the event, I stepped out into the lobby, still buzzing, shaking hands, answering questions. Then I froze. My mother and sister were standing near the entrance. Patricia in a floral blouse she wore to church, Megan in hospital scrubs, hair pulled back tight, dark circles under her eyes. They looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Mom approached me first, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Emily," she said softly, we came to see you." I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Disbelief? Sadness? Maybe all of it. Maybe none. I waited. Mom took a shaky breath. "Your aunt sent us the article. We didn't know you'd become so—" She tried again. "I was wrong. About everything. I didn't understand what you were trying to do. I didn't understand you." She reached out, fingertips grazing the edge of my sleeve, like she wasn't sure if she had the right to touch me. "I'm asking," she whispered, "if you'd come home, even just for a visit." Megan stepped forward then. No smirk this time, no arrogance. "Emily, things haven't been easy," she admitted. "I got written up twice at the hospital, then laid off. And Mom—" she hesitated. "Mom's health isn't the best. We could really use you. I could use you." And there it was. Not love, not pride, not recognition, but need. They didn't come because they missed me. They came because life had finally given them consequences they couldn't outrun. For a moment, the younger version of me, the one who cried alone in a dorm lounge on Thanksgiving, wanted to fold, wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that maybe, finally, they saw me. But the woman I had become knew better. I stepped back, gently removing my mother's hand from my sleeve. "I'm glad you came," I said, steadily. "Truly. But I didn't build my life so I could return to the version of myself who never felt good enough." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Emily!" I shook my head. "I'm not the daughter you can call only when things fall apart, and I'm not your fixer. Not anymore." Megan's lips trembled, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew she had no right to. I picked up my bag. "I hope things get better for you. I really do. But going back to that house would break me in ways I've already healed from." Their shoulders fell. Not dramatically, not in a cinematic collapse, but in a quiet, defeated way that said they finally understood what they'd lost. I turned and walked out of the lobby. For the first time in my life, I walked away without guilt, without fear, without looking back. And God, it felt like freedom. When I stepped outside the conference center, the sunlight hit me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Warm, grounding, quiet. I stood there for a moment on the busy Charlotte sidewalk, letting the hum of traffic and distant laughter wash over me. People hurried past with coffee cups and tote bags, living their lives, unaware that a chapter of mine had just closed for good. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, like the final scene in a movie where the hero wins and everyone who doubted them fades into the background. But what I felt was something else entirely. Peace. Soft, steady, earned peace. I walked toward the parking garage, the click of my heels echoing through the concrete stairwell, and I realized something important, something I wish I could go back and tell the younger version of myself. It was never my job to make them love me. Family isn't defined by shared blood or matching last names. It's defined by the people who treat you with dignity, by the ones who show up when you break, by the ones who stay even when there's nothing in it for them. I slid into the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, and let out a slow breath I felt like I'd been holding since childhood. The city skyline glittered in the distance, the road stretching wide open ahead of me. For the first time, I didn't wonder whether my mom or sister would call. I didn't replay their voices in my head. I didn't think about what I owed them or what they expected. All I thought was, I made it out, and I made something beautiful out of the pieces they broke. As I drove away, I felt the weight fall off me, mile by mile, the expectations, the guilt, the longing for a family that only existed in my imagination. And in that empty space, something new settled in. Strength, clarity, self-respect. And maybe that's what real healing looks like. Not revenge, not triumph, but choosing yourself without apology. If you've ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you, you're not alone. Tell me your story. Tell me where you're watching from, because every time someone speaks up, it reminds someone else that they aren't the only one trying to rebuild from nothing. And if this story made you feel seen, even for a moment, you belong here. This is your space now.